So first on the agenda for this afternoon is John Staples again. He's going to tell us about the RCA TK76 camera, and you're actually going to demo it, right? It's going to be operational. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that from John. So take it away.
Let's start with, and I hope everybody's had a chance to look over that TK76 over there and play with it. And I've got a whole bunch of test patterns, color in black and white, resolution charts, all that. And if you haven't had a chance to play with it, we'll play with it a little bit later. So here it is. This is this camera. This camera was the first broadcast quality color TV camera that was presented to the broadcasting industry at an NAB convention in 1975, and it wasn't the first color camera, ENG, electronic news gathering camera, but it was the first video quality camera that was produced. The $35,000 initial price at that time was escalated to $158,000 in today's dollars for that camera. Camera weighed about the same as the film cameras that people were previously using. It was balanced in the same way on the shoulder of the poor guy. 18 pounds, if you hold it on your shoulder a while, it starts hurting. But instead of having to rush the film back to the studio and having to go through a developing process and then editing, they could originate right on the air over microwave. Or some poor guy was holding along a probably 1-inch helical recorder, and here's the battery pack. It's a 12-volt, or you could plug it into somebody's 12-volt ignition on their car to keep this thing going. And it was kind of it was a revolution. So this camera actually came from Cron, Channel 4, and Steve is the person that actually facilitated this. Steve Garaventa, and Steve, thank you so much. And I got the camera for a good price. There was no documentation available at the time, so I talked to my friend Chuck Ferris out on the East Coast. He's got, I counted 17 studio cameras in his collection right there, and he was really generous. He sent me a full set of documentation for that camera. Later on, Steve found the documentation for this camera and added to it, and so I had complete documentation. There's two versions of this camera. This is the early version. That is for a later version. So it was nice to have complete documentation for the first early version of this camera.
Is that the one sitting here?
That's the one, and it's running. So anyway, the camera was not working. I'll show you some pictures of the inside in just a second, but I needed to make an expander module because it's non-standard. It's almost standard, but not quite. If you go across all the connections, it's sort of different by one connection over the same span. So this board is a homemade board, and I had to take a connector and split it up into pieces and put it all back together. And this was essential in getting this camera to work because the camera had lots of problems. So here's what's inside. It has a beautiful lens on it. This lens itself is worth a fortune. Both the iris and the focusing on this lens are motor driven. The way the camera is working, it only drives the iris, but not the focus motor. The external connector for this camera allows the focus motor to work from an external controller, but not from the camera itself. There are 9 plug-in modules that fit into a backplane in this camera. The technology uses 3 tubes. They're all Plumbicons, they're not Saticons. Saticons came later. The Plumbicon tube, there is no gain adjustment of a Plumbicon, so you have to get your iris or your illumination right to begin with. The Saticons actually allow you to actually change the gain of the tube, so you have a little more adjustment in actually steadying the camera up. But this is a Plumbicon, so it's an earlier version tube. The Plumbicons, of course, are those Philips type Vidicons, high-res Vidicons. So you come in through, there's dichroic lenses that divide into red, green, and blue video amps, and then a lot of processing that goes through this camera. An amazing amount of processing that you will not find in consumer equipment. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. And lots of adjustments. You can look at each one of these guys here is a screwdriver adjustment. Each one of these guys here is a screwdriver adjustment. Each one of these guys here is a screwdriver adjustment. This is all in the deflection chassis. Every one of the 3 tubes, you have every possible electrical adjustment and mechanical adjustment to get all these things into registration. Once you do that, you've got all these electrical adjustments to bring so you generate the correct NTSC color signal format. Here's what the back plane looks like. There's about a little over a kilovolt under some of these traces, so that little guy there covers up some kilovolt traces out there. This module right here is a power supply, and it has a kind of a flyback high voltage supply that the Plumbicons run at about a kilovolt on them. Here it is with the other side with all the modules pulled. Except the power supply. The power supply actually is actually heat sinked to the case itself. Each one of these Plumbicons has an adjustment for a depth adjustment, so they all at the same plane for the focus, back focus, and also they had a rotation adjustment. Okay. Look down here. There are some additional switches. The off on standby, when you go to standby, it keeps the filaments of the Plumbicons on, but turns everything else off, because don't forget this, normally you're running off batteries. There's a color bar generator there. You flip that up, you get a nice set of NTSC color bars. There is, for low light situation, and we were just trying this with the lights turned off for NAT, I was able to flip the preamp gain up 9 dB, and I was getting good full color with this room really darkened down on the color charts there. So let's take a look at some of the internals. Here's one of these guys pulled off. Here you're looking at the front of the Plumbicon, and right underneath it is the video preamp. And these video preamps are equalized for low, medium, high in the bandwidth of the 4 megahertz video bandwidth. So they can even tweak. That's what these adjustments here. They can even tweak the video response curve from the Plumbicon. Here's the cute little viewfinder, and everything here is backwards because you're looking at the viewfinder through a mirror. And when you look through the mirror, then everything comes out straight again. I was real lucky. At the same time this camera came in, I discovered on eBay the matching AC power supply. Boy, was that a find! Is it the right color, the right everything? It's just you can see it sitting right next to the camera. Inside the box is a totally typical open frame 12-volt power supply. I think nearly 100 watts, and the interface of the camera. Put in the 12 volts, video comes out, and if you have an external camera control, which I do not have, you can start playing with some of the other parameters of the camera, like focus.
Viewfinder is black and white or color?
The viewfinder is black and white. And the way the viewfinder works, as I said, these Plumbicons, they have no AGC, so you have to get the right intensity on it. The way the viewfinder works is that if you start saturating the Plumbicons, what it does is it either puts crosshatch or negative those areas of the image where you're overexposing, which is really nice. So if you're looking, particularly on people's faces, if you're overexposing the faces, we'll start getting these lines on it, and then you just back off the iris.
They call it a zebra pattern.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. The zebra pattern. Okay, here's basically what it is. You've got 3 tubes, your red, green, and blue, preamps, And the signals are all built up to the same amplitude. In other words, if you put a pure black and white pattern into it, the red, the green, the blue, even though those tubes may have different sensitivities, the signals are all amplified, so they're coming out of the preamps. They're all of the same amplitude. Okay, the blue one is going to look a little noisier because the tube is less sensitive, say, than the green tube. But they're all brought up to the same amplitude. Okay, which really makes it nice when you're starting to get these. You're starting to align the register the three tubes so you don't have registration or fringe in your color signal. It has auto iris, and what the auto iris does is it then looks at what's coming out, feeds back into the lens. So as you pan, the iris will follow to keep the video level at what optimal video level. There's also a the white balance is done in a slightly different way. For white balance, they take the signal, they keyhole it, so they only take a small part of the center of the video signal by putting just a pulse in that blanks everything out except a very small part in the center. You put it on a white card, push a button. The gains of the processors are changed, so you get the right balance, the right white balance. The memory is open base open source gate, open gate FETs. So open gate FETs, they say in the manual, that it should keep your white balance for maybe even a few days. And there's actually a relay in there that closes the signal to the gates of these FETs. It adjusts the white balance. The relay opens. The FETs are sitting there, open gate, not drifting, and that keeps your white balance. So it claims if you do white balance today, it'll hold for tomorrow. I haven't found that to be totally correct, but that's what they're doing. Anyway, these. Again, back to I already explained these switches. That one last switch is what you do with the viewfinder. The viewfinder can just be the normal video, or the zebra video, or external. For that, you feed signal into that molded connector, so you can see what the studio is sending back to you, rather than looking at what's coming out of the camera itself. Here's the color bar generator. Turn the color bar generator up right there. This is what you get. So it's nice if you don't want to put on the air something, you just give them bars. Okay? So anyway, few weeks later, what was wrong with this camera? The camera has almost no specialized electronic components in it at all. There's a couple of ICs, but they're off-the-shelf ICs like the 1496, quad mixer ICs. They're using those in the modulators for the NTSC signal. And most of the rest of the ICs are plastic, like 2N 3904s and 3906s, totally bread and butter transistors, but plastic. And that was the problem. Plastic transistors dating back to 1975 are not very hermetic. And so a lot of them were just bad. Fortunately, everything was replaceable with totally off-the-shelf components, but it took a long time to get through and figure it all out. Okay, and the documentation sure helped. Well, anyway, here's sort of the very first picture that I got. You can see the registration is terrible. I just put some colored things up there and to see what it looked like. And when you're building a camera, and I think Richard, you really know this when you get your first picture. This is. You'll never forget it. Oh yes, it's just wonderful. You get your first picture, but the registration, everything about it. But at least now it's working, and that took weeks. And so weeks later, here we go. And it's here. I hope everybody has a copy of this here, the television. Everybody get their copy, and pattern. So just some pretty pictures at this point. Here is again the viewfinder. It's a cute little CRT in there, and this is a picture photograph right off the face of the viewfinder, and you see it's backwards because you look at it through a mirror in this thing. I think originally there was a prism, but this one has a mirror, not a prism. I don't know. Okay. I had to make a lot of test patterns to test this thing. Of course, everybody has copies of the Indian head, but a lot of these others here, I had to generate, and then Gilles printed out in his really nice color printer these color test patterns too, and so that I have all of these and more right over here. And if you guys want to play, we'll just go through some of these test patterns and see what it looks like on the monitor. And by the way, I have 3 cameras running over there. I have a single tube color camera and then another so-called micro camera, and we'll talk about those in another talk. Okay? But I hope everybody gets a chance to sort of play with this camera, because it's really a unique and fine piece of equipment. The registration on this camera was really the hardest thing to get running right. By registration, I mean all 3 tubes line up to the very same image. Okay, so you got to get the linearity right, you got the height and width right. You've got to get everything right, the rotation right, and so I made up this pattern here for both linearity. It's always nice to have a circle, and then all these little rounds right here. And the way you do it, everything is aligned to the green guns. The green is when you put together an NTSC color picture, the green is what, 56%, 59, and then red is 30, and blue is 11, I think. Okay, that's how it goes together. Okay, but don't forget, after the first preamps in the camera, they're all brought to the same amplitude. And so what you do is you take either the red or the blue signal from one of those 2 guns, and you mix it with -G, minus green. And if the red or the blue matches exactly with the green, it turns out on the monitor all those circles disappear. They just vanish. If there's any bit of lack of registration, you can see the edges of these circles start peeking out. And it's a really powerful way to look at what you're doing, rotating and focusing and doing everything you need to do to bring all these things in registration. That was the hardest part about getting this camera going, getting that registration. And again, coming back to the TK40 and so on, using orthicons, the old color cameras, that must have been a real nightmare.
Didn't have that scheme for adjusting it either.
I'd like to hear, not right now, but I'd like to hear if you have experience doing that.
We did try and get a TK41.
Can you hold on that and then come back and tell us, because I'd be really interested in hearing about it. Okay, so registration, and for a long time I wasn't holding registration, and I found out why. There were some other mechanical and electrical problems, but right now the camera is solid. So doing that, you're making these mechanical adjustments up here, the rotation and getting the all in the same plane, all these adjustments here, and there's a whole set for blue, a whole set for green, and a whole set for red, linearity, width, height, and a number of other adjustments. So there's a lot. Aperture correction. This camera will produce a very sharp picture. Aperture correction is one of the things. Okay, aperture correction is one of the things that really makes this camera broadcast quality. And so, when the beam is scanning the plumbicons, the beam has a finite width, so the convolution integral, you might say, between the beam size and the image that you're scanning softens the image. Okay, so how do you spruce it back up? Oops, what happened? That's not where I wanted
Sort
to.
of ahead of you.
I didn't, is it automatically? Okay, I hope it's not automatically changing. So, one of the things you can do in aperture correction is just in one line, you can apply a little bit of high pass and feed it back onto the signal itself. So you integrate the signal in one line, feed it back on itself with a suitable delay, and you can sharpen up the edges of a signal in one line as you scan that one line. So you are basically deconvoluting the convolution integral of the beam finite width with its first derivative. So that sharpens up. That'll sharpen up the line. But you also want to do it vertically as well. What's going on in the line above, and what's happening in the line below. Well, if we're putting out that middle line as video and sharpening it with this little this is the horizontal line sharpening right here. It's a little 140 nanosecond delay line that feeds back in. It has to know what was going on one line up, but it also has to know what's going on one line next. And has it gotten to that line yet? Because it's putting out this middle line. Well, what they do is they delay. They have two delays, each one line. It's about 62 microseconds. So the line that's being put out is actually the line before the line that was scanned before. So it knows about the next line, because that's the one that I just looked at. The one that it's putting out is the line right before, which is the one we've already sharpened horizontally. And because we have one more delay, we have two line delay, it also takes a look at the line, the next one laid earlier, and adds all those in. It differentiates, feeds them back in, so it's deconvolving the finite width of the scanning line. So that's how they get the kind of resolution in this camera. The aperture, it's called aperture correction, but it's also line width of the scanning beam itself, aperture correction. That's the most complicated part of this talk, by the way.
What about the first and last line?
Good question. I don't know. Good question. Maybe the first and last lines are not, maybe throw away. Yeah.
You may not want to get into this as deep as I want to know, but, and this is fascinating. Do they run some kind of bucket brigade digital memory on this? And
These are SAW chips. Surface acoustic wave.
So it's a surface.
These are surface acoustic wave.
Okay. So they throw a line into the SAW filter.
Exactly, and it comes out 62 microseconds later.
Yeah. And then they do a real.
So they have to modulate. They have to modulate and demodulate it, of course, into the SAW filter.
They do a real-time summing with the live stream.
That's right.
So you're one line behind.
That's exactly. You got it exactly.
Differentiating. Obviously, you're going to be edge detecting.
Right.
So you're using that.
You've got it exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it exactly right. Very good. Yeah. No, but it is SAW filter technology. That is not bucket brigade, but SAW filter.
Yeah, you did mention SAW. I read it or I didn't hear it.
Okay, no, I didn't. But thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so it's getting better, and I think the rest of these are just pretty pictures, and they're very pretty pictures. Beautiful lens. Look at that. That lens itself is worth a fortune. And the iris goes down to lens cap. So you run the iris, it actually goes to 0, so you don't even need a lens cap. If you run the iris to, it's called, I think, LC or something like that. And so you don't have to worry about putting a lens cap on this camera if you run the iris to I think it's called LC lens cap.
On this, except that the lens cap protects the glass from being scratched.
Yeah, please be careful. The power supply, again, I mentioned that. It's just an off-the-shelf open frame. It's inside. And this is an actual screenshot. And you can see a little bit, but I think this is about as good as it's going to get. And you can see the thing is capable of about 400 lines of resolution. That's broadcast quality. 400
What it
lines.
would look like if you switch that aperture correction out. How bad?
I don't know.
Just curious.
It would look. You wouldn't see that. You know, it still look good,
Fuzzier.
and it might
VHS quality.
it might even have a better signal to noise ratio because you are differentiating and feeding it back in. But look at that. That's a good 400 lines resolution in a color camera with plumbicons. Okay, that's damn good. 1976. You know, as I said, it was premiered at the 1975 NAB convention in the fall of '75, and in '76 it sold like gangbusters. Everybody wanted one. They couldn't make them fast enough.
Where did they come up with the name Plumbitron?
What?
It isn't a very distinguished sounding name. Plumbitron?
Plumbitron? Oh, with Plumbitron, it's based. Yeah. Okay.
It's a lead image converter.
Thank you.
Just a bad acronym. Okay.
Yeah.
Vidicon is a video image converter. Is the acronym.
Richard is our expert. Thank you, Richard. Good. Anyway, okay. There's color, and you know we'll play with it. We've got a lot of test patterns, and you can play with it and see really how good it is. And there it is at home on the workbench. And this camera, by the way, RCA made a version of this camera called the TK760. And what they did is they took the guts of the TK76 and surrounded it with a much bigger package, including a really nice viewfinder and a nicer lens and things like that. But the camera itself, the guts of the camera, was the TK76 inside the TK760. I don't know if any of these really existed, but they were made available by RCA. Does anybody know if anybody had heard of a TK76? 760, I mean, CK76, 760.
I've seen them. People have them, just the camera heads, but they don't know what they are.
Huh. And here's the team, a bunch of old and middle-aged, pot-bellied white men who are responsible for putting this together. And it was put together kind of off base, it was, but it took some doing to get this together, to get it approved, but they did it, and it turned out to be a tremendous success.
On the forum,
Yeah.
you would be given these talk. Some guy said, I was on the team that developed the TK76.
Was it one of these guys?
He might be. I don't know his name. I just know his handle from the forum.
Cool.
We'll have to go back and look.
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, they're the names right there. And I'll just finish up with my own selfie. Yeah, I think this thing is on. Oh, there's another one. Oh, okay. Anybody recognize these names? And there's my selfie. I think this thing is on automatic, but the trick is not to look into the camera, not to look in the monitor, but to look in the camera when I'm taking the picture, which is kind of weird. Here I'm taking the picture, but I have to look over here to take that picture. Okay, that's it, guys. Questions? I mean, or more information from you guys. You guys know about these things. Tell us more.
Popular culture end of it. I saw a series of ads.
You want to take the microphone?
Oh, okay.
Because we want to get all this recorded.
Okay, I'm Nat Pendleton. I'm from Seaside, California, which is next to Monterey. And I brought this TV over here, the TT5, and I collect old televisions and radios. And I used to work at Defense Language Institute, but I retired last fall. So, I was just going to say that on YouTube there was a video, and I wish I could help you get the correct name so you could find it easily, but it was a series of advertisements for RCA products, and one of them is a bunch of television engineers and cameramen saying, I recommend the RCA XL100 television set. It's the best television. And he's shows this guy from the field carrying that, and he like has that camera here, and he sets it down, and he goes, I recommend the RCA XL100 TV. It's an ad from 1976, and it shows the TV sets that they're all watching and claiming that it's the best color of any color TV set in 1976. And maybe it is with this, but they didn't mention the Trinitron. No. I thought they were better too.
Anybody else has a good story to tell? You got your slot too.
Yeah, no, but it's no. This is a little different. No, one reason for that little switch for external viewfinder for external is that if you remember when you're watching a newscast, you have some talking head and you got a picture to their head next to their head. Well, this way the camera guy could make it easier to frame it correctly. So that's one reason you have the external viewfinder. Also, they could use for other things, but that was one of them. And the other story I heard, I didn't see it, I wasn't there, but during this transition from 16 millimeter cameras to electronic news gathering, I guess some news crew was taping some mafia guy. And so the mafia guy turned to his muscle and says, "Get the film from that camera." So he just literally, went up to the camera, took it, bam! And then a third story, again, I wasn't there, but RCA's competition was Ikegami for a while. And they made the HL79, I believe. And that was truly a beautiful camera. So Ikegami was trying to sell them to ABC. And what ABC would do is they would buy a bunch of cameras or a bunch of equipment for like the Olympics. And then they would take, after they use it for the Olympics, they give it to the O&O stations. So this guy who's in charge of purchasing quite a few cameras, which was an immense amount of money in those days, he liked it. He says, prototype, okay, looks good. He's very happy with it. He then took the camera, and again, this is through the grapevine, he held up by the handle next to his side and let it go. And said, if you can design it so that it works after a drop like that, I'll buy, it was under 100, but quite a few, it was worth Ikegami to go back and do it. And it was almost a standard for a while. They were really quite a camera.
Wow. Okay, thank you. I will say that this camera is also designed to be handled very rough. The whole internals of the lens and the Lumicon are all shock mounted on rubber inside the camera and not attached rigidly to the case. So this camera, I've heard stories about people actually do the same thing with this camera, getting knocked to the ground in a crowd or a riot and still working just fine. So RC did pay attention to that, the mechanical integrity of the camera. Anybody else?
So did the mafia guy kill the camera?
I don't know.
Don't know.
That was one of the stories I heard.
Okay, what's it?
Given the technical challenge of bringing this one back to life, I'm wondering, are there any others of these operating these days?
Well, who knows?
Those were very common at one time.
Who knows?
There are a few out there. There are a lot of duds.
Well, I assume that nobody would be doing broadcasting from them. They're all probably collectors.
Did you have collecting dust? Lumicons go bad on the shelf.
I'm really lucky that this is a good one.
Those unprotected gate MOSFETs, did you have trouble with them?
No, they were fine.
Amazing.
Yeah,
actually.
they were fine. It was all these other plastic. I think those were probably metal MOSFET. I mean,
Maybe in a little metal can.
I think they were probably.
Original,
I assume because they were probably on a special PC board.
Literally 1 volt withdrawal.
Yeah, they're in a little compartment of their own on one of those boards, but all the rest of it is plastic transistors, and a couple of very common ICs, and that's it. Oh, totally off the shelf, which I really have to compliment these designers that they did use off the shelf stuff instead of having to design custom ICs, and they were able to pull it off.
Everyone likes to think that plastic is a good seal for water. If you operate vacuum systems like John does, you know that water goes right through plastic. Yep. It's just a matter of time. So not surprised to hear that those are no good.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. That was a fascinating talk.
Yeah.
I learned a bunch of things.
Oh, thanks.
program.
So after all these wonderful talks about these wonderful videos, video production, you had to get that on a TV channel. And I worked for quite a few years in the cable industry at a manufacturer of television equipment, and just want to share with you a few of the challenges that we faced when trying to make a true 6 megahertz channel. In the beginning, I looked on a catalog, RCA broadcast catalog from 1939, and they were very proud of their stuff. But the first thing they said right at the front is that you had to pay extra for vestigial sideband. Just like you buy an app on your iPhone, and there's paywall comes up and you have to pay something extra. So they didn't have vestigial sideband automatically. Of course, they didn't have very many channels in those days. When I was a young pup in this business, I tried to figure out what the rules were for a 6 megahertz channel. Thank you, John. And I actually drew this chart many years ago, 50 years ago, Andrew, trying to figure out who regulated what in the 6 megahertz spectrum. And if you really paid attention, there were many actors involved. And back then, it wasn't easy to make a true 6 megahertz vestigial sideband compliant modulator with all of these features met. There's one opened up at the end table there. One of the things that happened in early cable TV, as you know, took the signal from the top of the hill, brought it back to the people in town. Initially only the low band, channels 2 to 6, then they carried low and high band, channel 2 to 6, 7 to 13, and they very quickly realized that there was this big gap in the middle. They were carrying bandwidth. They could make money out of that by filling it up with other stations, but there was no content. So they started using various video sources, cameras, panning, meteorological instruments, or character generators giving you the competitive price of carrots in all the supermarkets. I'm serious. 20 channels of announcements. Well, character generators are an interesting way to generate video, but they contain a huge amount of information. You see a little arrow where the 1 is. That's the 4.18 megahertz mark in the baseband spectrum of a character generator. So they spill that into the adjacent channels quite easily. Even if you had a VSB filter, this was long before SAW filters. So one solution we had to apply was to filter the bejesus out of the spectrum using heroic low-pass filters that would limit the harmonics from the fast rise times of the character generator to within 4.2 megahertz. And that worked. And here's a quick glance at the progress made in a few years. From the 1970s, the one that's right at the corner of the table there is what that we made. Had more than 30 circuits to manually adjust to be compliant. A lot of tweaking. And it was frequency agile. You changed the channel by changing the converter board, changing out, putting another one in. And then fast forward 30 years to one of our competitors, actually, Pendleton. They've done an incredibly good job with those little modules. These things are frequency synthesized, microprocessor controlled, cover from 54 to 860 megahertz, all in one little box, and they work perfectly. They work perfectly. And you can see the little one next to the modulator over there. Just a lot of progress came along. So based on that, we just get to our head end. This is a head end you can see downstairs. It's working. It's working now as we speak. And I'm going to talk a bit about video sources that we use. A little bit about the video monitoring options. A little bit about, I know you shouldn't read your own slides. Anyway, you're going to see this in a minute. The video sources, absolutely love the little micas. I don't know how many of you have used those.
They're very inexpensive. They produce perfect video from a jump drive or a video camera card. They're a little bit fussy to get going sometimes. They don't like files made with a Macintosh computer. we discovered that the hard way. But you can program a lot, and I've got a drawer of those downstairs. And there's only one problem: when you put them all together, one remote control will change them all. So quickly figured out that the solution was to put a little flap in front of all the IR windows, held together, held firmly by a magnet that pushes the flap closed. And you lift the flap and put a washer on it to the one you want to adjust. It worked. Just a little bit of had to get it done. So on our video head end, we can monitor the source video in a number of ways. We have a routing switcher here with which we can view the source video. We can view it on a waveform monitor, which is an HP waveform monitor, and we can view it on the Nikagami broadcast monitor, so we can see what's coming in.
And that's that super HD line monitor.
Sorry?
That HP line monitor.
Oh, yeah, the HP monitor is interesting. HP only made one waveform monitor. They made it for AT&T long lines, and it beat the pants of anything Tektronix ever made. They made it with a special tube with an extra accelerator gun in it.
It's a mesh, yeah, mesh.
And it is incredibly bright even in single line mode. It's absolutely magnificent waveform monitor. And yeah, so we can check all of our videos. Source. You also see a button on the right that says demod. I'm going to come to that right now. This is the modulator rack using those wonderful little agile modulators, plus one, which is one of very few channel 1 modulators in the world. This is a retuned channel 2 modulator by cooperation with Pendleton. I talked them out of the drawings, and they figured out I wasn't much of a threat. And we did manage to create a true VSP channel 1 modulator for some of our TVs that have channel 1. So when we want to monitor RF, we've got a couple of ways to do it. We've got a HP spectrum analyzer, 8558B. That's the 75 ohm version calibrated in dBmV, which makes life easy. And the demodulator, I referred to the button on the demod button on the routing switcher. This is a SA demodulator. We can demodulate one of the modulated channels, and in this composite picture, well, you can see it. You see the channel 6 multi-burst modulation, a good VSP spectrum. You see the upper sideband, very little of the vestigial sideband. And then the demodulated multi-burst is seen on the waveform monitor. This is the after modulation and demodulation. So the demod has a feature called a zero chopper in it. Zero chopper is a very interesting feature. It momentarily switches off the carrier during the vertical interval, which simulates 100% depth of modulation. Makes a nice little white bar pulse in the vertical interval. So if you set that up on a 0 to 100 scale on your waveform monitor, then adjust your depth of modulation till your peak white is at 87.5. You've achieved 87.5% depth of modulation. It's a good feature. Now, what the heck is KALW doing in our TV rack? That was something I decided to have fun with. KALW, as you know, was the first Armstrong band FM station on the West Coast, licensed to the San Francisco Board of Education on 42.1. And just for fun, I decided to modify one of these modulators to operate on 42.1, not far from the visual frequency, so a change of crystal and a tweak of the VCO, and up the deviation up. Anyway, it's broadcasting on 42.1. So we take the actual KLW signal demodulated Summit, put it mono into this, and broadcast it up to the benches, so that people who are fixing these radios can actually prove that they work on the old Armstrong band. That's just a little non-TV diversion.
Great.
So, in closing, I look at everybody with great anticipation. Volunteers welcome. We would really like to have some people helping us maintaining our exhibit and our sets. These old sets, they need maintenance. So please join us. You can take your pick of a problem child to fix, and we could really use the help, and we would appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Any questions for Gilles? All right, go ahead, please.
I've got one. Now, obviously, when they came up with the vestigial sideband standard originally, they were based around what filters could be easily implemented, and they had no adjacent channels in use anywhere.
You're right.
Cable use, obviously, you want to use every adjacent
Yes.
channel.
Yes.
What do you do with the overlap of frequency? Do you peak? Do you remove the vestigial sideband and peak?
No. Well, first of all, your assumption isn't quite correct. I found somewhere else another RCA price list, and the price for that optional vestigial sideband filter was incredibly high. So if you make enough effort with tuned cavities, you can make a VSB filter. So they did when they did introduce a VSB filter, it did stay in the 6 megahertz channel. Now the sets were not that selective.
The sets, I mean,
You're right.
you then lose the video resolution if you remove it from the transmitted signal.
No, you don't lose video resolution by vestigial sideband filtering because you have a Nyquist slope in the IF response of the TV set.
You do, but it's
So you make up
obviously
for it with a
You pulled your first corner up higher than zero, so you're coming up.
The carriers are 50%.
Yes.
So we'll sort of add together.
Yeah, but if you're removing the below, then don't you lose?
No.
No, you still have some below.
Well, I realize you still have some.
Yeah.
About 1.25 megahertz.
But do you remove it when you're doing cable applications? Do you
No,
remove
no,
that signal?
no. But all good TV sets will get you up to 4.2 megahertz, but at about 50% in practice because of the sound trap.
Right.
That's the limitation. But you don't lose, as he's trying to explain, or I'm trying to explain not very well, the Nyquist slope in the receiver makes sure that when you add up the vestige of the lower sideband and the upper sideband, you come out flat. You do come out flat. However, the adjacent channel suppression in TV set wasn't brilliant in the beginning. That's perfectly true. So cable companies know how to make money. One solution is to, by adding the mid-band, they got to give you a set-top converter. Set-top converter will provide the required selectivity to select all the adjacent channels.
Okay.
It's one way to make money, you know. And we've got 2 adjacent channels downstairs on purpose. I did it just as a lark. 12 and 13 are adjacent, so we can see if the sets will separate them or not, you know. And we do have mostly ancient sets downstairs. Did I answer your question?
I think so, really.
Yeah.
And obviously, the 4.5 megahertz.
Well, 4.5 megahertz
sound
trap.
FM, so it's going to reject AM somewhat
Yeah.
naturally, and then you're going to have a sound trap, and maybe also.
If you happen to spend back in the days about $40,000 for a Tektronix 1450 demodulator, professional demod, and the test modulator that they made that were very rare. I happen to have one. And you put them back to back, and they're true VSB transmission with a SAW filter in their modulator. You get perfect response. You get a perfect multiburst, even though you go all the way to 4.2 megs. You can do it, but it's heroic work, and it's not compatible with the price of consumer TVs. You know.
Now, so the next speaker is going to be Ron Code. He's going to talk to us about some of the early days of TV and how it got invented and some of the people. What I like about this, I suspect your talk is a mostly non-technical talk. I had to smile a little bit when John said, this is a non-technical talk with your TK76
Start out
talk.
with some simple differential equations, and then we'll go from there.
So go ahead.
Well, my talk today is about inventors, inventions, innovators, and the pioneers of television. So what is an invention? Here's a pretty good definition. A device, contrivance, or process originated after study and experiment. And some of the people who are called inventors really wouldn't qualify following that definition there. But before I go into television, let's talk about the ancestors of television. Think about photography and its relationship to motion pictures. I mean, you have to have photography before you can have motion pictures. What we've added is motion, right? So what would be the ancestor of television? Any suggestions? Okay, I suggest it is the fax. Okay, now the fax was invented in 1843, improved by Scottish inventor Alexander Bain, improved by Frederick Blackwell a couple years later, and then in 1856 Giovanni Caselli made the first practical fax. In fact, he demonstrated it to Napoleon by sending a fax image from Paris to Marseille, 500 miles, and that was 9 years before the telephone was invented. So this goes back a ways.
How did they send it? Wire or just
Telegraph wires.
telegraph
The telegraph is pretty old.
Yeah.
Okay. In 1902, German inventor Arthur Korn used selenium cells to make a very successful commercial machine, which was widely used by newspapers and for a long time. One problem with a fax machine that it shares with early television is how to synchronize the images. Now, early television used a very simple method. They both had to be on the same power system, the same AC frequency to run synchronous motors. So there was no synchronization as such, maybe a slight adjustment of phase or something. In the case of the fax, they did it by the pendulum clock, which is quite accurate. So if you start the swing at one place at the same time as another, they're going to track very well. So it isn't any surprise that the inventor of the first facsimile machine was a clockmaker. So these things all have ancient and interesting connections. So we see that the fax machine preceded television by about 60 years. And if you're interested further, there's a book called Rise and Fall of the Fax Machine by Jonathan Cooper Smith. I mention the fax here because the idea of scanning often is thought of as belonging exclusively to television. Obviously, the fax machine is a scanning tool. Now, Isaac Newton said, if I have seen further, I have been standing on the shoulders of giants. And he's referring to other great physicists like Kepler and so on that inspired him. Edison said, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. In the case of Edison, I'm not sure he had the 1% inspiration even. Okay. And in software, we always said that 90% of a project takes the first 90% of the time, and the remaining 10% of the project takes the other 90%. You know. So modern television did not come as a bolt out of the blue, produced on golden tablets by aliens. It came from the work and inspiration of real people. So I want to talk about real people. And that's where I'm going to start by passing out the quiz. So the quiz will come before the lecture. That way we'll see who already knows too much. So if you'll each take one page of my quiz here. I'll pass around some extra pens because some of you didn't come prepared for my quiz, I know.
One page?
Just take one. Yeah, pass it on here. Take a pen if you need one. If I don't end up with enough, you can share. Okay. I think I'm going to start by asking you, as soon as it gets all the way around, to answer questions 9 through 12. And we're going to say who knows too much here, okay? I gave a talk 3 years ago about early German TV. And I found that not only did people in the audience know about Telefunken's big camera called the Canon, but they knew the name of the operator and the name of his dog. So I want to find out if we have that kind of knowledge here today. And if so, maybe I'll call upon, or ask you at least, to either correct me or add to what I have to say. So while it's going around, I will actually start talking about this fellow here. His name is Paul Julius Gottlieb Nipkow, and he was born in what is today Poland, at the time a Jewish part, a German part of Poland, of a German part. Okay, and he led the foundation of anything you could call modern television. And what did he really do? Well, he came up with a spinning disc with little holes in it. But think about, how did he get this idea? It isn't by chance. It was by study and trial. He studied, in fact, his studies were in physiology and persistence and telephony and motion pictures. You see, I don't think modern television, we could have it if it weren't for the way the human eye works in connecting things. Do you remember a little thing that kids would have where you have a little bunch of little stick figures on a little tablet and you flip them quickly and it looks like the stick figure moves and does something? That's all because of the way the eye works. So Nipkow didn't just punch some holes in the disc. He thought about a way of digitizing an image. And he patented that in 1884. I would say it was the earliest method of quantifying an image electrically by scanning. Okay, and unfortunately for him, he was just too early. There were no electron tubes at that time. He just didn't really have the tools to go any further with it, and his patent just languished. Nothing happened with it. Later on, he was sort of hoisted up as the father of something or other, and they tacked his name onto the German TV station at the time, although no German would have heard of him. So I don't think it really had any propaganda value. You might even wonder why they didn't call it the Folks something like they did with everything else at Naziville at that time. He died in Berlin in 1940, just 2 days after his 80th birthday, and they gave him a state funeral because they had now sort of made him more famous. Now, everyone's got their quiz paper. I'd like you to answer items 9 through 12. And just circle either A, B, C. Yeah, they're all ABCs, aren't they? Circle an ABC on those 4. Shouldn't take you long. There's multiple choice. And guessing counts. So it's not like one of these SAT tests where guesses could count against you. Any question about what the questions are? Okay, let's start with the first one, and then we'll do this by a show of hands. How many people think that Farnsworth successfully first transmitted a straight line? Okay, that's the correct answer. Everyone's seen the one where he transmitted a dollar sign. That actually came later. And when he transmitted the straight line, he moved it so you could see the straight line moving at the other end. So it was the first transmission like that of a motion picture. His wife's face was later done too. Okay, where did Zworykin work before he came to RCA? How many said Philco? Wrong. How many said Westinghouse? Correct. You're saying both, okay. Maybe he did work for both. Did he? You don't know, okay. Okay, so he came to America and he worked first for Westinghouse. What?
Wasn't he also at Philco?
I don't know. I'm asking you. I don't think so, but no, I can tell you he wasn't, because he went from Westinghouse to RCA and he stayed at RCA. Okay. What disease did Armstrong as a child suffer from? Polio? No. St. Vitus dance? Yes. It causes.
I thought it was fear of heights.
He probably did, but it causes involuntary twitching. And I'll come back to that. And lastly, which company is not a major part of RCA at founding? General Electric? It was. United Fruit? It was. Philco was not. Okay. United Fruit, they got 5% of the founding stock at RCA. Now, why? Maybe someone else can tell me. They held patents because RCA was all about patents at that time. And they weren't about manufacturing at all. Okay, so anybody get them all right, essentially? Good. I'm trying to, the first part of a good lecture is trying to humiliate the audience a little bit. So, okay. Now, the rest of these questions, I think you may look at it and answer by putting the letter of their last name at one or more. So some have multiple answers. But while as I talk, you might think about those. So I've already covered NIPCO. Now I'm going to cover these. Shall I do it in alphabetical, in chronological order as to their birth date? That's sort of fair. So we'll go to DeForest. I have like 4 pages on DeForest. And I will just say this right from the very start. It can be summed up in one word. He was a shit, okay? He doesn't deserve any of the fame he ever achieved. He stole ideas right and left, claimed them for his own. He made numerous drawings that he didn't understand and finally won out in a big patent suit. Anybody want to argue that? All right. So we won't spend too much time. He didn't, he's given credit for inventing the triode, but he fiddled around with a bunch of glass envelopes, putting stuff on the outside, the inside, and later on, when the triode was really invented, he came back to some old drawing and said, there it is, I had it all along, He not only did that, but he wrote a book in 1950. The book was DeForest, Father of Radio. See, so he claimed the title for himself. It's sort of like claiming you won the election or something. You say it often enough, someone's going to believe it.
I remember him on This Is Your Life.
I saw that show.
And she was like, 50, and he was 95. And
he had 4 wives,
Yeah.
and none of them died either. Most of them lasted 1 or 2 years, but the last one stayed with him. He probably had. He didn't die a rich man, however, but he went through a whole bunch of really bad business deals and forming companies that went broke and acquiring some patents and eventually selling them off. And there's I came across this thing here. It's kind of cute. There's a California historical marker located at the eastern corner of Channing Street and Emerson in Palo Alto, dedicated to him. Okay. Stands at the corner of a former Federal Telegraph Laboratory and references Lee DeForest development there. So you might know that. Furthermore, I found there's another connection to our area here, and this one is kind of bad, I think. DeForest archives were donated by his widow to the Parham Electronic Foundation, okay? Which in 1973 opened in the Foothills Electronics Museum at Foothill College in Los Altos Hills. Actually, it's Los Altos. It's not in the hills, is it? Foothill? I went there. Yeah, just Los. Anyway, and in 1991, the college closed the museum, breaking its original contract of displaying his stuff or whatever. And his widow sued, of course, and won $775,000 against Foothill College. Do you know anything about that? I don't.
Know that they got evicted from their lodgings there. I was one of the last bunch that went through the museum and got a chance to see things before they kicked them out.
Okay. Well, knowing what I do know about DeForest, I'd just as soon not have anything that would honor his memory in particular, especially what he did with some other people. Apparently some of this material was acquired in 2003 by History San Jose and put on display as a Pelham collection of early electronics. Anybody know about that?
I know you have to get a call ahead.
Okay, so it's sort of like a closed thing. There was a store up at Tahoe that was never open. It was some kind of doll museum, and this person collected dolls from all over the world. And this is what you call a tax write-off for his museum, which could only be visited by appointment. But they could run around the world, lots of big expenses. Okay, so that's DeForest. Now, in our quiz, I'm going to give you the answer to one of these. Okay. Who is the least deserving of the fame he got? There it is, DeForest. Okay? He did get a lot of fame. His wife, his last wife, wrote a book entitled I Married a Genius. Who would do that? You know, obviously she probably didn't write the book either, you know. But yeah, that was DeForest for you. Now let's go to Jenkins. Oh, I forgot the picture here. I'm behind on the pictures here. Next slide, okay. This is Jenkins. Now this guy looks interesting from the very get-go. Now Jenkins was involved in film more than electronics, but he basically started the American wing of Baird's products, as far as I can see. He had some successful patents. He dabbled in a number of things. He made more money in motion picture and motion picture equipment than he did in electronics. And he even started a car company at one time and supposedly was the first person to put the engine ahead of the driver. I don't know that you make any money on that, but it's sort of interesting. He also made a tiny car for a midget woman from Mexico who went by the name of Chiquita, was only 2 feet tall and was a performer. Okay, there it says. There's a factoid that's got to be worth a drink somewhere. Okay, so that's Jenkins. Now, I don't think we need to say too much more about Jenkins because yeah.
Jenkins is the one that helped Edison improve his projector in 1895.
Well, he did make money in projection equipment, but not so much in television, although he had patents in that area too. Which I should refer back to the idea of a patent. Anybody ever file for a patent? Don't. Okay. 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 First of all, your patent will only be good in the United States unless you go to Europe and get their European patent and the Japanese patent and all these other patents. It's going to cost money, and you have to get a patent lawyer. The patent lawyer will look at your invention, break it down into 14 different steps, using such terms as a cylindrical object with an axis along this, and so on. So that presumably your invention for the radio could also be applied to torpedoes or something, if stretched in the way they always do these patents. So that's patents, and patents are a very important part of the history of TV and radio. And a lot of the misery came out of patent disputes, as you're going to see coming up. Not for Jenkins, though. He just sort of left the scene. By the way, here's our scoundrel, DeForest. Here, not a very good picture, but well.
So what was in your quiz here? Jenkins belonged to what number?
Jenkins is a J. I didn't give you the answer, but that would be 4. He deserves the least mention, historically speaking, from a television standpoint, of the people I have on this list. Want to argue?
That would be number 2. Oh, wait.
Number 4?
Number 4 then is...
Oh, wait, I've got two copies of this quiz here. All right, Sarah, all right. Who deserves least mention, historically speaking? That would be Jenkins, in my opinion. Okay, I could lift him off the list and no one would have raised their hand and say, oh, don't you remember Jenkins,
DeForest down there. For the least...
DeForest is the shittiest person. Where is that? Two deserves the least mention, historically speaking, would be DeForest. Okay, I better look at this. My own. I must have revised this or something. Anyway, that's what comes from.
Maybe you faxed it to yourself.
Yeah, using early invention. So now we're to Zorkin. Now, okay. Now, Zorkin's a real scientist. He really studied this stuff. He was born in Russia, apparently had a pretty good childhood, nothing remarkably bad happened to him until the Russian Revolution came along, and he was on the sides of the whites as opposed to the reds, and at some point he left Russia and came to the U.S. But before that time, he worked in St. Petersburg at the Institute of Technology under Boris Rosing. Who has heard of Boris Rosing? He probably deserves as much as anybody to say he invented television. The Russians, in fact, have a postage stamp pretty much claiming that. Of course, when I was a kid, we always sort of made fun. The Russians claimed everything, And you know, no, but Rosing probably did. In 1906, he displayed basically a television image, you know, using a scanning disc and so on. So Zorkin studied there, and he left Russia, and he, after graduation in 1912, he studied X-rays, and during World War I, he was enlisted and served in the Russian Signal Corps, worked on testing radio equipment, and he left Russia for the United States in 1918 during the Russian Civil War. Now, this is kind of a nice picture of Zorkin, because everybody thinks of Zorkin as sort of a fat old man, but he wasn't always, okay? There's Zorkin. Looks like somebody you could like, right? Okay. Yeah, he's got some hair. He's got hair there, okay? When he came to the United States, he rather quickly found work at Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, okay, where he eventually had an opportunity to engage in television experiments. And he obtained some patents in 1923 on television systems, and another patent and some other stuff. And he gave a demonstration to David Sarnoff, who was then head of RCA. Sarnoff basically hired him on the spot, gave him free rein, said, come to work for me, you can develop television, what's it going to cost? Zorkin said, I need $100,000. RCA eventually spent $50 million, okay? So they really backed him in a big way, okay? So he presented his Iconoscope to RCA in 1932. In 1935, the German Reichspost started public broadcasting using his tube. So there you go for Zorkin. So did I have an answer for Zorkin on my original answer sheet here? No, he's not one of my answers, okay? So, but now, next comes Baird, okay? Now, most interesting about Baird I can see is his middle name, Logie. Who has a middle name of Logie?
Scotsman.
Do they? Is that common?
I guess.
I've never heard it before, and I don't know anything about Scotsmen, although they have a lot to do with inventions in general. You know, shipbuilding and okay. Close enough. Close enough, isn't it? Oh my! I know I had one of him. Let's see. Oh, here he is. And he does look like a Scotsman after all. He's got sort of a Scottish sort of look to him here. Here he is, Baird.
Maybe he even played the bagpipes.
Well, let's see what he did do. Baird. I've got rid of most of my props here. Got Sarnoff to go. Well, I had it up there, didn't I? And then I took it down because it was in the wrong place. So, what do you know about Baird? He did a bunch of crazy things. I mean, he was imaginative. He did high definition color experiments. He did they were triple interlaced lines of color. He had all sorts of ideas. I guess the bottom line I would say about Baird is he just had the wrong ideas. I mean, he was backing the wrong thing, mechanical television. Here it is. All right. Baird, he took Nippo's disc, blah, 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 okay? And he transmitted the first television picture with a grayscale image. So up to that time, the actual transmissions of things we'd call television were just black and white, full-on black and white. He did the head of a ventriloquist dummy nicknamed Stooky Bill. How many knew Stooky Bill? Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, it was a 32-line vertically scanned image at 5 frames per second. That would be a real blinker, wouldn't it? Okay, yeah. In 1941, he demonstrated a system of 3-dimensional television with a definition of 500 lines. In 1944, he gave the world's first demonstration of a practical, fully electronic color television display. His 600-line color system used triple interlacing and so on. So these are marvelous ideas. They just didn't turn out to be a practical invention, really. Okay.
What was the year? Was it color?
The color, it said, in 1944. So the war wasn't even over yet. Okay. There were similar concepts in the 1940s and 50s, differing primarily in the way they recombined the colors generated by 3 guns. One of them, the Greer tube, was similar to Baer's concept, but used small pyramids with the phosphors deposited on the outer faces. All right, so Baird, which I have in mind as, I didn't give him mention on any of my answers here either. But you might have said he was a prolific inventor, okay? I think he deserves to be called a real inventor. So now I'm going to go on to Armstrong. Okay, Armstrong, sort of our hero here, okay, if we have one. Well, the thing about Major is he was in the Army, okay? He was in the First World War, first as a captain, then promoted to major. And there is a question on there about who was in the U.S. military, right? Okay, so you've got to have him down on that one, okay? Who was an officer in the U.S. Army? Well, who was the other one? Do you know the other one? Sarnoff. He was. And at first I thought, well, that's one of those titles they give to somebody really high up in industry for some reason. No, he was in the reserves for a long time. He was first a colonel and eventually promoted to general. So, I saw where he was, you know, his actual pinning involved just another general, you know.
Well, I believe General Eisenhower promoted him, but also he said, get radio, set up a radio station. Yeah.
I don't know, okay. I don't know what role Eisenhower might have had at that time. Sarnoff intended ever since, after that, always to be, he preferred to be called General Sarnoff. But I think we shouldn't hold that against him, because after the Great Wars, particularly World War I, somebody who was a major deserves to be called major for the rest of his life. Okay? I'm not so sure about Sarnoff. I'll say more about him in a second. So here we are at Armstrong. Armstrong, okay, he was an electrical engineer. He suffered from this childhood illness, not terribly rare. It's now called Sydenham's chorea. It's a neurological disorder, often preceded by rheumatic fever. For the rest of his life, Armstrong was afflicted with a physical tic, exacerbated by excitement or stress. Because of this, he was a very withdrawn child. He did a lot of his study and experiment at his parents' home. He enrolled in Columbia University, graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. Okay. One of the things about Armstrong is during World War I and World War II, he let the U.S. government use his patents without any fee. He didn't believe he should profit during a war. Okay. Most of his things we think of as having to do with radio. He invented the regenerative receiver, the superheterodyne receiver, cascade amplifiers, all sorts of things that are used in TV, most notably FM. Okay, and he and Sarnoff were really good friends. When he demonstrated the regenerative receiver to Sarnoff, the two of them stayed up all night in some radio tower getting distant broadcasts that they never had heard before. Sarnoff loved the guy, gave him free rein, plenty of money. For his patent on supergeneration, RCA gave him $200,000 plus 60,000 shares of RCA stock, okay, which was later increased to 80,000 shares, making Armstrong RCA's largest stockholder. So if you're thinking, well, Armstrong got the shaft, they stole his ideas, they didn't, you might find some truth in that, but I'm finding that the more I know about it, the less I like that simplified story, okay? Armstrong decided if RCA won't back FM, he'll find people who will. And he went to Zenith and General Electric and says, I'll sell you patents on this. You pay a royalty, I'll hold the patents. And they did, I guess, although RCA had ways of retaliating. They were able to get the FCC to change the band location where FM would be. That made it very difficult for these companies who'd put money into the old FM. In 1940, RCA offered Armstrong $1 million for a non-exclusive license to FM. You know, he could still have his other business. And he refused this offer because he felt it would be unfair to the people he had already licensed. I would think that he could have somehow settled with those people appropriately and still kept a $500,000, wouldn't you think? Over time, this impasse with RCA dominated his life. Okay, bitter and overtaxed by years of litigation and mounting financial problems, Armstrong lashed out at his wife one day with a fireplace poker, hitting her in the arm. She left their apartment with her to go to stay with her sister. During that night, on January 31st, 1954, Armstrong jumped to his death from his window of their 13th floor apartment in New York. So there's something in my list about tragedy and disappointment and frustration. I think we'd have to list Armstrong on number 6, wouldn't you? Okay. And I also put him down as number 1, you admire most. And a prolific inventor, definitely number 3. And you already had him for officer. So he gets 4 mentions. Wowee. Okay. We are now, how's my time going?
Negative 10 minutes. So finish up pretty soon.
All right, well, I'm almost done here. I could say it quickly. Sarnoff, I'll just say it. Sarnoff is the guy people love to hate because he was too damn successful. He was a visionary if there ever was one. He's not an inventor. He's the Elon Musk of his time, you know, maybe even more so. And I have information about how RCA was formed as a way of holding patents that they didn't want to be in foreign hands, how eventually that turned into the RCA Corporation of today, how he worked his way up from a poor immigrant child selling newspapers to become head of RCA. And I find that the way he treated many of his employees, Zorkin included, was actually quite good. And RCA became the company it became, no longer is, because of him. He maybe was the one indispensable person. So Sarnoff gets mentioned on my quiz as the one who rose from nothing to something, okay, to power. Lastly comes to Farnsworth. Okay, you all know quite a bit about Farnsworth. I'm not going to belabor. Came from a family of 5 children, naturally Mormons, and he had this idea supposedly of looking at, by the way, Sarnoff, okay? Young man, looks very personable, okay? Of looking at plowed fields and thinking of scanning. I mean, it can't be that simple. We already had the fax and everything else for scanning. Farnsworth was a stubborn man, not understood by very many. He refused to make an agreement when RCA made him a good offer. He fought in the courts, and who knows how things work out in the courts. I mean, the courts gave a patent to DeForest that he didn't deserve, and eventually Sarnoff won his patent disputes, but at great personal cost. He turned to drink. He died an unhappy person. He invented other things, supposedly fusion in a bottle and other, but nothing ever came of anything. And his image dissector tube certainly isn't the father of the modern TV camera. I don't have anything more to say on this. Anybody have any questions?
Isn't there a plaque in San Francisco?
Where his laboratory was? Farnsworth, I didn't, like I said, I didn't say much about Farnsworth. There's a statue in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol building. Every state can have 2 statues, you know? A little bigger than life size typically. And Utah put Farnsworth's statue in there. Okay. And for California, one of them is Father Juniper Serra. So whoever your most famous people are. But he's scheduled for replacement now by somebody else. So I would say Farnsworth has sort of fallen out of favor. You know, his star is diminished even in Utah. So.
All right, thank you, Rob.
Sure.
Okay, so this is the TT5 sitting in its normal location where it is in my house, and just sort of used as a title slide. Here it is as a press photo. This TV and another one just similar to it, the GE 171, HM171, a 5-inch 1939 set, were displayed at the airport. And eventually, I got in touch with Tom through that, not through the exhibit itself, but we met and you had your Dumont Monster. What's that called? The
RA101 Westminster.
Westminster, the most gigantic television I've ever seen. And it was on the display. I remember seeing it there. And then I had these two sets on display, and other people had theirs. So I saw CT100 there. Name's not going to stay on. Okay. So that's their press photo. Just gives you, a pro photo of those two sets. Just nice resolution. There it is on the display, out on the D wing, I think, of the San Francisco airport. And okay, so when I was in high school, I was flipping through a copy of Electronics magazine and landed on page 39. It was the April 1939 edition, a version. It was in bound volume in a library, and I shouted my lungs out in surprise at seeing the black and white version of this advertisement. I had heard about pre-war TV, and I always thought it was sort of like something on a rack or a lab bench, people messing around, experimental television. And here was living proof, because in the Electronics magazine edition, it says April 30th, 1939 on the bottom, and it had this ad, and you can see these are professionally made cabinets. And it was a commercial launch. It was an attempt. And so that totally changed my view of what pre-war television was like, and then I spent the next several years looking for them. It took forever. But there's the price of the TT5 is $199 in 1939, so you can multiply that by about 15 or something, maybe $3,000, $4,000 of our money today. End of the Great Depression, so maybe even jack it up a little more. But it was an expensive thing. And then the $600 TRK-12. Okay, so this is the front of its chassis. Because, and I'm going to give you a close-up of this in a second, because this television is the only TV that has proof of being used in California when it was bought brand new. It's got KTLA and W6XAO. It was retuned in 1947. It had to be, because KTLA got their commercial license. Before that, they were called W6XYZ. And they became KTLA on something like February 2nd or whatever of 1947. So this TV would have been retuned to get those two stations. So I'll get to the ownership of it in a second, but there's no other TV that I can think of that, except the one at UCLA, that is referred to as the Don Lee television. It's this big, beautiful blonde tall set with a mirror and a lid, and it's kind of a Don Lee version of a TRK-12, and it's down in UCLA's archive of television and film and television archive.
Question?
Yes.
Is that also a 50 hertz television?
No, it runs on 60.
Okay, because at the time in LA, I believe they had 50 hertz power.
Fascinating.
Yeah, they did.
Well, I mean, it was used in Long Beach, and I'll show you a fascinating. Okay, here's the thing, and I'll get to that in a minute too. But about the tuning of the set, there was no KNBC Channel 4 or whatever it was called back. KNBH, I think, is what it was called. Hollywood Channel 4, NBC in LA. There was none. That was not on the air when the set was retuned. So you only saw the two stations on the front of it. It wasn't tuned for Channel 4. But here's sort of the lineage of Channel 5 and its date, February 22nd, 47. And then Channel 2 changed from their experimental call sign to their commercial KTSL, and it went through, now it's KCBS in Los Angeles, and we got the radio station. Confuses the heck out of everybody, right? But Channel 2 actually pre-existed KTLA by several years. It came on in like 31 as a scanning disc television station, and Don Lee, who was a car dealer, made a lot of money as a car dealer, ran his own radio network on the West Coast, and he had this TV station. And he just kind of progressed with the times and the inventions. I think he probably worked closely with RCA and maybe Dumont, because some of the equipment he has looks kind of RCA-like. And he was not a builder of a manufacturer of television. He would have probably, he could have built an empire on that, I don't know. But he never got into making TVs. He always just got the equipment and broadcast to LA. So he had actually been the longest running station. KTLA got the commercial license first, so they're going to claim that they're the first station west of the Mississippi, but they got the commercial license first, but they were formed during the war. Okay, so this set belonged to a Navy admiral in Long Beach, California. That's what I was told by Harry Poster, who bought the set from an estate dealer and sold it to me in 1995. So I shelled out everything. I emptied my bank account and bought this TV because I'd always wanted a pre-war TV and I'd never owned one. Maybe more on that later, or I'll just tell you about it later. But here's a connection that I found in Radio Annual, both in the 1942 volume I have and in the 1945 volume I have. I shot the 1945 volume because the layout of the page didn't break the paragraph that I want to show you. In the 1942 edition, it's busted in 2 pages, and it was kind of a pain, so I just took the 45 version, and there's the message. They actually, so the Don Lee station talks about who was watching them, and it goes into the detail of with what were they watching them. So you've heard that there were approximately 7,000 televisions made before World War II of all brands, makes, and sizes, large and small. RCA led that manufacturing thing. I believe General Electric took second place in a number of sets made, and Dumont was close behind. And then the rest are kind of off the wall ones. There's some Thetas, and you can see names like Gillifen, Stromberg, Carlson, Stewart, Warner. There were not a lot of those made.
And I think actually even a larger subset than that were homemade.
Well, lots of kits, lots of kits. It may be in the 1942 edition, it talks about the Meissner kit. It mentioned the Meissner television as one that was watching their TV station, W6XAO. So when I read this and it said approximately 50 TT5 television receivers, a number of the latter, the TT5s, are operated satisfactorily in Long Beach. And I had been told that there was a retired admiral in Long Beach who had owned the set. And I just went, whoa, it's one of those 50 sets. Maybe a store was marketing to them. I don't know why that was the thing in Long Beach. And so there's the name of the original owner of the set, as far as we can determine. However, it was retuned after he died, possibly by his wife. Okay, that's the only thing I can guess. I did not find any other retired admirals that owned, there's no mention of his ownership of the TV, but I didn't find any other retired admirals living in Long Beach. So it's probably this man. So I think his wife probably had it retuned. And he seemed to be a big wig in the US Navy during World War I and between the wars. I mean, he even made the cover of Time. Okay, so this guy had some money, I guess, to spend on something like this. The most important information I found is it named the TV sets and the fact that there's 400 or so in Los Angeles. Philadelphia had about 400 or 500, Chicago 400 or 500, Schenectady probably 300, 400, and New York probably had 5,000 or more before the war. So you have, what I wanted to get into is the secondary of this was who would have watched television? Where would it have been seen? So this is sort of a quick summary of the pre-war television stations in the US. So take a look at the map for a minute. We'll start with California because that's the most important, right? So from the left, you have Don Lee is the W6XAO, and the one below that, it became KTLA, which was owned by Paramount Pictures. at the time. And notice that the stations in blue, the one in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Journal, that's how you remember, its call sign refers to the newspaper that owned it, really didn't do regular scheduling. And it didn't announce it very often. So if you had a TV set, you wouldn't know when to turn it on and get those 2 hours a month that they ran the station. WBKB was the one in Chicago that really carried the ball and ran the shows and did the studio broadcasts, ran films. And so if you had a television set in Chicago, you would probably watch them mostly. Zenith, again, was random, kind of like the Milwaukee station. Zenith ran WTZR. So if you move east then to Schenectady, up there in the north, WRGB, R.G. Baker, the GE CEO at the time. There's his initials. And I think that the WPTZ refers to Philco Television. The Z's just there. Okay, so Philco is in Philadelphia. Then we go to New York that had the 3 stations. Now, I remember in college looking through microfilms of the New York Times and quickly scrolling in each issue to the radio section. And I found out that on Sunday you could get the Week in Television at the bottom of the radio log, way at the bottom. And they literally just had about that much of the newspaper showing an entire week of television. And I never found, from pre-war to about 1946, that all 3 stations had programming on them at the same time. You go through the years, and NBC was always there, and then it was bouncing back between Dumont and CBS that were on the air. And there may be a time, and I just never found it, when all 3 were transmitting at the same time. So New York was, of course, the biggest receiver of TV sets. There's a list you can read through, and I boxed in California stations because they're written on the front of the set, on its chassis, so we gotta focus on that. And they're the owners, again. And it's interesting to see that after the war, a lot of newspapers got into television, okay, a lot of media. But before the war, it's either broadcasters, owner of broadcast networks, or electronic companies. Dumont and GE would sort of fit that category, and Philco, radio manufacturers. Ballard & Katz was a theater chain, and Zenith was a radio manufacturer. So really, it's after the war that you get a lot of ownership from TV stations, newspapers, publishers. Okay, so here, I guess there's time for this, right? We can go. Yep. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, give me the 10-minute warning. And
3 minutes, so give it 10 minutes.
okay, all right. Okay, so here's LA, Los Angeles, and you can just read through there. Klaus Landsberg came over from Germany and put the Paul Nipkow station in Berlin on the air, and then realized it was time to get out of town, left Berlin and ended up in LA working on this TV station during the war. Okay, and I just love that picture in front of the Paramount Pictures gate doing their live show. And there's an internal, and I put that one there because you have a closer view of the camera with its little call sign logo on it. Television Productions, Paramount. Okay. And there's a call card. Now, they had program cards that they would mail out as a postcard to the viewers, anybody who signed up for them. But they were only for one station. Okay. These guys aren't going to list what's on the Don Lee station, even though they're broadcasting concurrently, but they're not going to list the competition, so they just sent their own. And so until 1948, that's all you had was the newspaper and these television logs that were mailed out prior to TV Guide. Okay, and here's an outdoor shot, and it says there Mount Lee, and I've heard Mount Wilson called the transmitter site. So that's something I need to look up, whether it was Mount Wilson or Mount Lee, or maybe it moved. Okay, I'm not familiar that much with the Los Angeles site. There's a ton on this station. If you just look up Channel 2 KCBS and then read the history of it on Wikipedia, there's plenty of information on most of these stations. Okay, so there's an internal shot of their programming. Okay, and you got that from ETF. ETF has an enormous amount of information on some of these stations. Not on all of them, but they do. They don't have a lot on, they have stuff on Philco receivers, but they don't have a lot on Philco broadcasting, which is too bad. Okay, there's a camera from them. And that looks, the box looks completely different than anything I've seen. You know, it doesn't, I don't know if they made it themselves or had some engineer come and make it, you know. Maybe it was made by Packard Bell. Okay, here's the Zenith control board. Okay, and again, I mentioned that they didn't have a serious schedule, and they really weren't into supporting television before the war. They never sold their sets. They made a couple and gave them to their engineers mostly and leased them in a few occasions, but they never sold their TV sets, and yet they survive. They survive at the Museum of Broadcast Communications in Chicago. I think owns one of them now. I saw them in a radio show once. Here's Ballad and Cats out in the field. And this Captain Bill Eddy, he's the guy who invented all kinds of things like scrolling wheels for the credits. He was able to sort of bring the movie world to television back before the war and then during the war. He came up with lots of little sets. He did this one that RCA used where it's an entire bay with little ships in it. And, you know, there's a miniature toys and it shows the big RCA cameras looking down on these things. So they did some dramatic production. So Eddy had a lot of smaller inventions, I guess, especially studio related inventions. And here's one of their wonderful cameras. It'd be lovely to have that television camera. Okay, so there's the experimental call sign, by the way. But they offered the regular schedule, so people in Chicago were able to watch TV at short range. It didn't probably go more than 10 miles away from the station. And during the war, most of the males were drafted into the military, and so they used women to run the cameras at WBKB and probably at Dumont and several of the others. Okay, this is actually taken from a 1950 TV guide called TV Forecast. It's what they call the pre-national editions, where before TV Guide became a national magazine, each city had their own version of it. And Television Forecast had this article about what happened 40 years ago. And there's no Channel 4 in Chicago, if anybody's been there. It got reallocated when they shifted frequencies in '52.
That went to Milwaukee.
And 4 got moved to Milwaukee, and they gave them, and 5 was assigned to LA, and NBC ended up on Channel 5. And 2 was inaugurated. So WBKB moved to Channel 2, and then it moved to Channel 7 when Channel 2 became CBS's WBBM affiliate, CBS-owned station in the city, and then...
Chicago had 2, 5, 7, 9, and 11. Not
right.
13.
Not 13 and not 4.
And not 4.
Right. And that was just strange. And then they had to go to UHF. And so they had one of the first commercial UHF stations in the early 60s, but that's another story. Okay, so there's the third. I managed to get on hold on eBay. I got issues 3 and 4 of Television Forecast. And you can see that, I mean, imagine putting this on the front of your TV guide today. A classroom demonstration, oh boy, horse races. But one of the things that I found fascinating, and I'll show a close-up of this slide, is that both WBKB and WGN in 1948 were covering the exact same baseball game. So you had 2 television crews covering the Cubs playing the Phillies, and there's the proof of it. If you can read the text, Cubs versus Phillies is the first one, and the bottom one says Chicago Clubs versus Philadelphia, so typo in this little garage manufactured printed TV forecast. This is the first this is the first magazine that came out that printed schedules of both stations, or more than one station. So you had the weekly call card, or whatever you want to call those things, the schedule cards. Then you had this TV guide that people started running at fly-by-night operation, and it started to grow and grow, and it became established, and then it became part of TV Guide National, which is a New York story. Okay, I had to put this in here just because I thought that was the coolest graphic for a TV station ever. I would love to have I wish they would use call signs like that, when they take a break. The towering WGN television skyscraper. I just thought that was the coolest looking logo I've ever seen on TV. So it has nothing to do with a pre-war TV. And this is a post-war station. This did not exist before the war. Only the WVKB station pre-existed. Philadelphia, where I actually grew up and heard stories about pre-war TVs, and then saw that advertisement when I was in high school and screamed, and the librarian came over and almost threw me out for getting excited about the ad for pre-war TVs. But look, they had TVs before the war. And I photocopied it. And so one of the things I've read about Philco's operation, WPTZ Philco, was they didn't have much of a studio. They broadcast from their radio manufacturing plant, and they had like a little loft up in it that was the TV studio, and sometimes they'd take their camera to the roof and shoot things out there. But they would just do film chains, minimal studio stuff, and a lot of field coverage. So their expertise goes down, according to Eddie's book that I have, they go down as being really one of the field broadcasting. So sports, annually they covered the Army-Navy game, and my father saw this during the war. He talked about it. Watched this on a mirror-led television set by some wealthy guy that lived in town and had this TV, and he invited all the kids from the school to come over and watch his TV set, and they watched the Army-Navy game during the war. And they were like in high school, entering high school. And there's the original call sign. Okay, yeah, we'll get to the demo now. So there's someone in the suburbs, and all 10 viewers had, out there in the suburbs, probably had a tower like this picking it up. And they had a thing called the Mummers Day Parade, which is a New Year's Day. Think of Macy's Day Parade, but it's a special kind of Philadelphia thing. You have to eat scrapple and hoagies to understand what I'm talking about. So the Mummers Day is a local tradition, but they would televise those and the football games, the local football games. And then you have GE up in Schenectady, and I found this really nice, this magazine again called The Televisor. If you can find it, get a hold of it. That you can download it from websites that carry old radio and TV magazines. It's got...
It's a cool call sign forecasting color.
Yeah.
On GB.
Oh, red, green, blue. Yes, yes. Well, I was thinking Baker, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so notice the women. Even the comment in the picture says most of them are women. It was wartime. This is a 1944 photograph. There's one of their studio shots. 2 news broadcasts, Dumont and WRGB Schenectady. CBS also did news, and probably RCA. And maybe all of them tried news, I don't know. I wanted to show some Dumont operations. There's an early Dumont test pattern. Okay. Grand Central Station, if you were in the old World War II Grand Central Station and went up to the upstairs, this was the TV station for CBS, WCBW. Okay, there's the log again. This one's from NBC, and this one dates from '39 in the spring. No, wait a minute. This will be 40. I got the wrong picture. Sorry. Never mind. It's 1940. It's pre-commercial. Okay, and then you have the famous. How many of you have seen pictures of these trucks that NBC owned? Yeah. Okay, what color do you think they were? Blue. Dark blue. There's a photo. I found this color photograph in Fortune, and there it shows part of the truck. Wow. Beautiful blue looking color. Wow. Nice vehicle. No one knows where they are. ETF doesn't know where they are. Everybody's looking for these. They're the holy grail of TV. Nope, they have a different one. They have a post-war. Okay, so then you have the famous WMPT going on the air. There's the announcement again. They came out. I mentioned this a little bit when I was interrupting somebody about their first year, their television's first year. They sent these questionnaires out, and it had the TV log and the questionnaire about how did you think of this show, and this little book reviews it all. So that's all I have for slides. Let's fire up and turn off the lights, I guess. we'll get the lights out and fire. I mean, complete darkness is better. So the story is this. I'm going to turn it on now so you can see it when it comes on. But, RCA called this a television attachment. It was a gimmick because it needed a radio to amplify the audio. Normally you would probably, most owners would plug it into a console radio. How many of you have seen radios by RCA that say, ready for television? So this radio was ready for television. And you sort of see something a little bit darker. Look at that on my head again, please. Drop it down. Take a picture of that. All right. It's maxed out. If you want to come by and look and peek under this thing, you can. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Steve. I used to work for KPIX Channel 5 in San Francisco. And this is just some experiences I've had. Channel 5 had a local TV show on KPIX called People Were Talking, and it was hosted by Ann Fraser and Ross McGowan. It ran from 1978 to 1992. We visited San Quentin State Prison, visited Mustang Ranch, was an interesting trip. Visited Napa State Hospital, my hometown, not the state hospital, but Napa. And we visited the AIDS ward at San Francisco General. And they had a number of guests that were up and coming as well as established. We also visited a nudist colony in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And all I can say is it was a fun one. I basically, no, that's Ann Fraser and Ross McGowan. And so all I can say is at the end of the day, it worked out pretty well. You're basically sitting in a hot tub, having free beer, some nice, pretty ladies, and you're paid time and a half. I was still on the clock. So that worked out nice.
So what were you wearing?
Yeah. Trust me, some people should keep their clothes on. Seriously. Okay, Mr. Gorbachev, when he was running the Soviet Union, came and spoke at Stanford. I was working in the studio. I was not there at the actual event, but one of the guys that I work with was on the roof, and they had a microwave transmitter sending the signal back, or the program back, to the station. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but sometime along the way, some suits came up and said, "Where's your transmitter at?" And they pointed to it. They said, "Okay." So I wasn't there, but I guess they pulled out the proverbial black box, put it next to the transmitter, and did a test. Right around that time, our station lost the signal. So in case something was going to happen, they wanted to control the narrative. And then while they were on the roof, they were talking to some of the sharpshooters. And they're just talking. They're saying, "Well, I guess in case someone starts shooting, you got to try to shoot back at them." They said, "No, our job is to clear a path." So I said, "Okay." And then there was this gentleman that was telling me a story. He was rather tall, 6'2" plus, and I'm kind of on the short side. Well, he got the job of running cable underneath the streets, via steam tunnels, and it was basically dirty. And if I would have been there, it would have been me. So I lucked out pretty good in that job. I lucked out there. Pope John Paul came to the country and did an open air mass in Monterey, California at Laguna Seca Raceway. There were 50,000 people there. My job was to make sure the cameras all looked the same. We would call it color. So you have, 8 6 to 8 cameras, and you made sure they all looked the same. And then the next day we had to get, we left Monterey that afternoon, and then we had to be back at Candlestick Park to do an open air mass there. One of the things that did happen there at Laguna Seca was that there was a cameraman on scaffolding shooting the pontiff as he was giving mass, and he had a very tight shot of the pomp of the Pope. Yeah, that's you have it. Okay. So, shows you what a good Catholic I am. But the point is, he had a close-up of the Pope, and his viewfinder just filled up his face of the Pope. And it was on a scaffolding, and someone started moving around, and it started shaking the camera a little. And it was amplified because it was such a close shot. So the guy says, "Hey, stop pushing, stop walking around," or whatever he said. The Pope heard him and looked right at the camera. So here this guy has the Pope looking at him, and he didn't have a happy face. So that was...
Might have been a few choice words there.
Well, no, he was on stage. And then the next day, we did a shoot at Candlestick Park. And what I remember most about that was security was pretty tight. So I would be here. At the camera there, you had the entrance, an entrance that we'd gone into, and then the rest of the park. So you got all your equipment, come up to this gate, drop everything, pull all the metal out of your pockets. They wipe, they scan you with a handheld metal detector. Okay, you go out, and then you go 2 or 3 feet and realize, oh shoot, I forgot something. Come back, sure enough, go back in, take out everything in your pockets again, and you do that a few times and it gets old. The other thing was that where the altar was at, that was only people allowed there were people that represented the Vatican. So it turns out, I don't know the connection, but someone at Channel 5 knew someone who worked at the Vatican. So they were able to get an ENG camera to get close-ups of the Pope. And according to the producer, the Pope was playing to the camera. So he understood cameras. We also did the 50th anniversary show for the 50th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge. We had a crew on top of one of the spires there, and they were there basically from the morning till after the fireworks, after the lighting of the bridge. And they had a portable bathroom up there, and it was neat for the first half hour. After that, it was just plain cold. I lucked out. I was on a 3-masted sailing ship in the bay, and my job was to shoot a microwave signal from the ship to Mount Sutro, and that's all I had to do. This ship was owned by a very rich man who had all his friends on board showing off, and I had some pretty good meals. They had it nicely catered. It was really nice, but again, you stay on the bay. If you're not used to being on boats and you're on the bay for, 8 in the morning, 7 in the morning till sometime after dusk, it's a long day. And they had fireworks, and they had the lighting of the Golden Gate Bridge. So the fireworks are going and going and going, and I'm going, I just want to go home. Then it hit me. They haven't turned the lights on yet. So I had to wait longer. So they finally get done with the show. Everybody's happy. We go back to Richmond. I get out, get all the stuff back in the vehicle, go back to the station. And after, I don't know if anybody's really been on a ship or boat that much, but if you've only done it one day, you start walking after that, and so I'm there walking around the station, pushing carts, and it seems like I had the spins on, but I didn't. But it just felt that way. And it just makes for a very long day, especially after working at Laguna Seca the day before. Okay. Now, this is this actress, Eartha Kitt. You may or may not have known about her, but she was a well-established star. Let's read the thing there. Well, when I first started at Channel 5, the engineers would go with the camera guy. And so you had the reporter, the cameraman, and a technician. His job, so the cameraman had the TK-76. The audio guy got to pack around a Sony BVU 100, which was a 3/4 inch tape machine. and you also monitor the audio levels. You're mostly a pack mule. Well, we go and they're interviewing, Miss Kid here, and I'm kind of looking at her and she's looked a little familiar. And so, they're all done with the interview and I'm there, scared silly to do anything wrong. I'd kind of go up to her and say, "Excuse me, were you ever on television?" And she kind of laughs, "Yes, I was Catwoman." And so that's how so I'm going, "Oh, okay." And so I walked away. Being mostly a lot of engineers here, some gentleman came up with a box called the Time Machine. And the Time Machine works by cutting out repetitive video frames. Each second of a television show usually has 3 video frames. Identical frames are deleted, making the program 1/30th of a second shorter. An additional 20 to 30 seconds commercials can be inserted into a program, and the viewers don't realize a thing. Result, more money. So, and that's great, and Channel 5 made some nice money off of that. So, one day, this gentleman up here was a reporter for the Tribune, and for some reason, he enjoyed listening to the radio announcers' version of the game versus the on-air announcers. So he's watching the game, and all of a sudden, he's hearing the game but seeing commercials. He wrote an article about it. Result, the NFL was not happy about playing with their content. So, to give you an idea, this was back in, I forget the time frame, but at the time, according to the gentleman who designed this, they made $250 million extra in revenue. So it was definitely a few bucks involved. And $93,000 per device. Now, when Channel 5 bought it, they bought it for a number of stations. In fact, it was our station in Pittsburgh where this guy saw this. So, did it cost them $93,000 each? Probably was cheaper, maybe by 20%, but still. And it was a big to-do, so my supervisor at the time basically literally went into the dumpster. Okay, now, this has nothing to do with TV by any means. Oh, yes, all right, sorry. Some of the challenges the designers had was soccer games. There's not a lot of sitting around in soccer. There's always somebody moving. Football, baseball, not so much. So that was a challenge. And then also passing closed captions in intact. And the FCC gets very touchy when it comes to closed captions. It's a nice black and white thing. You have it or you don't. If you don't, okay, fine. So it's pretty straightforward. Now, I got ahead of myself. I currently work for a company called iHeartMedia, and they own a bunch of 800 and some odd radio stations. Well, accidents happen. That used to be the backup antenna for an AM and an FM station outside of Auburn. And it came down. Well, what happened was that the gentleman up there in the black box was driving a big-ass lawnmower, and according to my understanding, he made a turn, sun hit him in the eyes. Next thing you know, he hit a guide wire. So that was, and I asked the gentleman who manages that site how much. He says, "I'll let you know in a month or two." But someone told me, like a good 200 grand there. Luckily, the bad part is, or the good part was a backup antenna for the FM station, but was also part of the antenna array for a AM station. So now they got to also tell the FCC, hey, our pattern's messed up for a while, which is more paperwork. How am I doing on time?
You're about done.
I'm done? Okay.
Finish up in the next few minutes.
Quick question.
Sure.
Who won the lawsuit?
I don't think there's any lawsuit involved. Thank God for insurance. All I know, the good thing is that this site happened to be owned by a company called Vertical Bridge. They own a lot of antenna sites. And basically, it's their insurance, or the guy is whoever the guy was, working for, the company the guy was working for. Hopefully, they have good insurance. Bottom line is, it's not going to be on iHeart's dime. I'll go through this really quick, but this is technology, and this is just basically in the days of old, Ampex videotape machines were used to be on 2-inch wide tape, and the main reason they got it developed was the fact they could record East Coast shows and play them back 3 hours later on the West Coast. Before that, they recorded the show on film and then transferred it over to video, and the quality wasn't that great. The other thing they did was, back in the days before before all the digital revolution and everything, they have some shows like People Are Talking that were they had to put about a 5-second delay into the video path so they could mute any profanity or audio or video. So what they did, they literally put the supply reel here, ran it up over the capstan, and then up some rollers that would be here, then down, and then. And the delay was based on 15 inches per second and that distance. And it was, you're going, okay, it worked. And they used that for, in the late 70s, early 80s.
Rube Goldberg.
Yeah, well, this is the actual picture of the video head. I have a real one here if you want to look at it, but the point is, that's the main transducer that converts audio to electrical. From the electrical, it goes to magnetic tape, and then is stored on the tape, and then on the reverse when you're playing back. That head wheel there rotates at 14,400 revolutions per minute, and it uses an air bearing. There's also a Venturi vane built into here so that it can take the tape and make it into a little valley. This is the capstan. Now, most of them had, I shouldn't say mechanical, but they had most machines use pinch rollers. This machine uses a vacuum on the capstan, so it cuts down on wear and tear in the tape. This is just I got going fast forward here. You can really haul tail if it wants, and then that's in play mode. I don't have any audio here, but those machines made a good amount of racket. Okay. And then that's just behind the scenes of the tape machine. You can see an hour and a half 2-inch reel weighs a lot. You don't want to drop it on your foot. It hurts. I can attest, I can speak to that from experience. Just more to give you an idea of what a beast this can be. This is what we call a film island. And basically it takes film or slides and shoots them into a video camera. They have a slide drum so they can have stills, and in the good old days they would have your audio on a little cart, and it had tones, sub-audible tones on it, and as you played the commercial, the slide drums would advance. And you always had to make sure you didn't put a slide in upside down. It does happen. So, that's just another period. And I can test from personal experience, that thing weighs a ton. That is a tank. So, and they had nice projectors. So, just a little side story. When you're in news, they have something called a B-roll. So they have the main film, and then they have another film which relates to the story, and so you go to that, but the audio stays with the first projector. Well, one time, this lady was given this is 16 millimeter days. This lady was doing a story on a rodeo or a bunch of cattle. So she starts with the introduction. She's reading, da 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 da, and then we're supposed to go to the B-roll, and it just shows a bunch of cows. So she's looking down, reading her script, and next thing you know, you look at the cows and they're upside down. So we had to go back, and the rest of the segment was her just reading her script because that's what she's supposed to do. Okay, this is what they call a multiplexer, and bottom line is a bunch of mirrors inside here, so you would switch, so you could switch either projector or the slide drum. And the whole reason, okay, this is a picture of the actual camera, red, green, blue, and everything else. Now, the main reason I even brought this or shown you this, how do you control the amount of light going into the pickup tubes? Well, you have your iris on your lens. Well, with this was the device, inside here was the device that controlled the amount of light, so you can, basically have your, correct video levels. And this was a little servo motor. And this is what it was inside there. This thing is what controlled the amount of light hitting the pickup tubes. This is defective, believe it or not, and when we got it, this is early 80s, and at the time, this was more than a few $1,000s. RCA made a lot of money on parts, let me tell you, but it was very specialized. And any questions? Okay.
Okay, so how do you get, how in the world are you going to get color out of a single tube color camera? And there's one sitting right over there. In fact, we've got the 3 cameras over there. We've got the TK76 right next to it. We've got that little Konica single tube color camera, and then we got another little camera over there. I hope people have noticed. So you have probably heard of indexed cathode ray tubes, where a single gun will scan the phosphors, but you have to know which phosphor that gun is hitting. And it's impossible to get the linearity and everything all synced up. So how do you know where that beam is landing? What they can do in these indexed CRTs is inside put another phosphor, say on top of every green. It emits ultraviolet. It's picked up by a photomultiplier. So now the circuit knows where that beam is, and so it can switch it to the right color for the right phosphor that the beam is landing on. Question is, can you do that for a same thing for a camera? And the answer is no, you can't do that because there's no way to index it, so you have to figure out some other way to do it. So you can probably imagine that in the front of the camera lens, or in front of the target, you put a series of red, green, blue, and if there's some way to figure out where the beam is scanning, you could figure it out. But again, it's not going to work. And by the way, it turns out that if you put these filters right in front of the tube, the thickness of that glass is enough that by the time you transmit the color stripes to the inside of the target, you've lost a lot of resolution. So in the better cameras, actually, they put those stripes way out here, and then use a relay lens to focus that through the glass onto the target, which is behind the glass in the camera. Okay, so that's one way conceptually to use these color stripes, but that's not actually what they do. And this is really clever. This is sort of the technical part of this talk. Imagine if you put on you lay these stripes. We'll put a set of stripes on the front of the video. We're going to be using Vidicons here, and we put a stripe that I'll call not blue. Not blue is red and green. Okay, not blue is red and green. So if you put this set of stripes on the front of the Vidicon and illuminate it, say with white light, white will go through the white stripes, and white will also go through the yellow stripes. The yellow is red and green, so white consists of all these. And so a white light will just simply go and won't even see those stripes. But let's put a uniform blue signal image onto the same set of stripes. The blue will not get through the red and green, which we call not blue, red and green is not blue. And so what you will scan out of the Vidicon during that situation is you will get a highly modulated carrier, AM carrier, out of the video that corresponds to that frequency of stripes across the front of the tube.
Playing card spoke to your pipe.
And here you go right here. Here is that signal right here. And if the stripes are close enough together, then you will get something around 5.5 megahertz. And the amplitude of that signal corresponds to how much blue there is. But for anything other than blue, yellow, white, green, there'll be nothing there. Same thing for red. Red is not cyan. Cyan is green and blue. So you put a red filter in, but you give it a little different spacing. And so when you scan that, if you have a signal which is green and blue, or not red, there'll be no modulation of the video through those filters. But if you put a red signal through those filters, you'll get a strong signal here. This one will come up around, say, 4 megahertz, a little lower in frequency, because the spacing is larger. Now these filters don't have to, they have a little bit of spacing, but they can be tilted, they can be all sorts of different configurations. Different cameras do it a little bit different way. And that is the secret of how a single gun color tube decodes the three colors. And it actually doesn't work that badly. That conic over there, I hope people have played with it. And you can see that it doesn't have the resolution of the TK76, but it works remarkably well. I just wanted to show you, for example, here on the on this phase diagram, cyan is not magenta, and cyan is blue and green. Yellow, for example, is not blue. Yellow is green and red, and so on. And so, okay, here's the camera. You can see it right over here. I have a tube camera right here. Jimmy, this came out of, or Richard.
Somebody gave it to us and it was.
This came out of I can't remember this came out.
Yeah, somebody brought it.
But I forget the brand of the camera this came out of.
JVC's GC4800U.
Listen to this guy, he's good. One of these is monaural, which picks up a higher resolution for the luminance part, and then up here there's stripes for decoding the other two. So that's basically, in a very simplified way, how a single tube camera can reproduce color. And there it is on the workbench, right here, and it works. That's that talk. Talk number 2.
That's interesting.
Yeah, question.
On the single tube color, given that color resolution can be lower than, because your eye isn't that sensitive to color resolution anyway, I would have thought the single tube luminance should have the full bandwidth and be nice.
What they do is they add back into the single tube, they get the green, but they can add back into the red and blue signals to get a little bit better bandwidth. It's not as good. And in fact, on this Konica over here, on the Indian head pattern, you can see it gives around 300 lines of resolution, which is surprisingly good for what it is. And the colors are not that bad. Let's see. The next one here is sort of a little sort of reminiscent for me, because a while back, I think I may have told you guys about the homemade Iconoscope camera that I made. I didn't bring it in today because I brought in just too much. But back about 5 years ago, Al Jones, who is the founder of the TCA, the Tube Collectors Association, gifted me that 1850A. We've got one of them right here. It's not mine, because the one I have, of course, is at home. But it's an 1850A 6-inch Iconoscope. These were actually made by RCA after the war, and they were used in basically their film chains. So the 1850A is in the TK, the TK20 monochrome film chain, rather than as a studio camera. So what I have done is transform it into this. I'll come back. This is the final product, and I'll show you a few pictures of how it got that way. And so the first thing I did, remember the first camera was built in a wooden box, catted up a metal box, sent out to a metal shop in Berkeley in order to produce all these aluminum pieces, and then just started dry assembling it. Has a swing out door on one side for access, and I wanted nice colors for this camera. I wanted it to look good, and there it is. And here's the inside of it. Here's the 1850 6-inch iconoscope. Underneath here is the video preamp. I went through 5 different video preamps, so I built them all on a little board with a standard plug, so I could exchange all these 5 different video amps until I came to one that was really working well. And also I have the blanking amplifier also in this little box right down here. So some of you may here at CHRS recognize these blue boxes, which CHRS came into possession of. A lot of those got given away, sold out. I took a few of them. This is the camera control unit that I built in there, and this is the high voltage control unit. It goes up to about 1.5 kilovolts for the acceleration of the iconoscope. There's a beam intensity control, just like brightness on a CRT, electrostatic focus, and all the rest of this is it's magnetically deflected, and there are some funny knobs like mosaic bias light, and shading, which are part of the
How many HP products gave up knobs?
how many HP products gave up knobs? None, actually. So anyway, this all got put back together in a really nice box. I wanted everything to be in just something that I could transport around rather than have a whole bunch of little pieces all wired together. And so so there it is again. There's the whole camera control unit with the high voltage. The CONRAC monitor actually came from here. Our cook, who wasn't here today, Keith Scott, had that. He wasn't using it. There was something wrong with it, so he said, take it. And then the line monitor was another non-functioner that came from a flea market here and came home with me. But here's what here's the quality of image that I'm getting out of that camera. This is kind of nice because this is what I'm doing is this is actually a screen grab from a video where I'm actually demonstrating the Iconoscope camera, not this one, which is the CHRS Iconoscope, of my own Iconoscope, which came from Richard, and kind of moving it around. But here is just a screenshot looking out my window down to the ham shack in the backyard, but you can see the really nice broadcast quality video that I'm getting out of this Iconoscope camera. There it is. Any questions on that?
How big is your ham shack?
It's pretty big. It's a pretty big ham shack. I've got broadcast transmitters in there. The big ones. I've got broadcast transmitters in there. I only operate on 150, on 160 and 75 on dipoles, and that's as high a frequency I care to go. But I've got a big collection of. I've got a big collection of ham radio equipment back there. All the really nice stuff. Yeah. Okay. The last talk is really short. It's 2 slides. And so thank you guys for sticking around. These little microcameras. And there's one sitting right on top of the Sony monitor right there. You have to sort of look and find it. And you notice that these cameras really have a whole pile of pincushion distortion. But what's good about these cameras is they'll work down to they're rated to work down to 0.01 lux. So they're a great night surveillance camera, and they have pretty decent resolution, as you can see.
How many IR sensitivity?
That is, what's again?
IR sensitivity.
I don't know about the IR sensitivity. I assume it's just daylight. Okay. But here's the surprise. How would you guys like some of these cameras? This is a giveaway. So so for you guys that stuck around, I've got two color cameras here. They're not very good. We need about 5 lux of light. By the way, all these cameras work on 12 volts, about 100 milliamps. Put out a full NTSC signal, built-in signal generator.
Only got 3 minutes left in memory.
Well, I've got less than 3 minutes to talk. Okay, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the black and whites, which are really sharp, have really good low light capability. And if you guys want any of these, I think the first dibs would be go to presenters and whoever else would like them. Here you go. I've got 8 of these cameras, 2 color, not so good, 6 of the black and white, great low level cameras. That's it. Thank you guys.